This interview is being tape recorded at Colchester Police Station on Friday the 17th of the 5th, 96, and the time is now 11:28. I'm Philip Norton, a detective constable for the police headquarters here to interview Michael Steele. There's another police officer in the room. DC Shakespeare, Essex Police Headquarters, Chelmsford. Thank you. Mr. Steele, could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Michael Steele. I live in Colchester. My date of birth is the 13th of the 12th, 42.
Okay. You don't have to say anything but it may harm your defence. You do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. If I can just interrupt. Hang on. We've just had a short interlude where you've had opportunities to speak to your legal advisor and you've had further refreshment. Are you happy for the interview to continue at this stage?
Yes.
Thank you. You have certain rights. I've just cautioned you and remind you of your right to speak as you will. You have the right to seek legal advice at any stage, which will be free of charge to yourself. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Your solicitor is in the room and I'm sure he'd like to introduce himself. Thank you very much. I'm Christopher Bowen, a solicitor with Jeeps & Sons here in Colchester. I'm here to explain my role, which is to advise and assist my client throughout the interview. At the first interview this morning, I made a very long opening statement. I don't propose to repeat that because I want to save as much time as I can today. Thank you. However, everything I've said this morning still applies. All I'd like to say at this stage is this. During the first interview, many facts were given which had not been discussed with me beforehand. As I said at that interview, I was disappointed by that. I'd like at this juncture to give you another opportunity of considering giving us further disclosure before the interview continues. I'd like to do that now and give you the chance of saying yes or no to that. Can you give me any further disclosure before we continue, please? No. Okay, thank you. All I want to say is, I cannot advise my client appropriately if I do not know what the strength of the evidence against him is. As a result, I find myself yet again having to advise him that he should exercise his right to silence because I cannot advise him as to the strength of the case against him. I ask you again to respect his right to silence. He knows that you've got to ask questions at this interview. I realise that I'm now going to give you the opportunity of continuing with this. Before I do that, the purpose of our break obviously is a confidential matter, but I've got one question to ask. Could you please, for our benefit, repeat the last question that we'd reached before my client asked for the interview to be suspended? My notes, I don't want to go exactly what my notes say, but there was mention made of a cooker. I wonder if you could repeat that question, that it began, was there one occasion when... Yeah, the question was, Mr. Steele, was there an occasion when yourself had been in company with Sarah Saunders and Pat Tate and any others in the house to mend a cooker? Was Darren Nicholls one of these people as well, DC Shakespeare? Because I've got a note of Nicholls' name here. Yes, so it was Nicholls, Sarah Saunders, my client and Patrick Tate, yes? And any others, if there were any others. I don't know whether there was or whether there wasn't. That's why I'm asking your client. Thank you very much, DC Shakespeare. Okay. Could I just say one thing before you continue? You have now had half an hour break with your legal advisor. You've been asked by myself if you'd wish to have any further time in which to consult with him. Is that true?
Do I need any further time?
Yes,
No.
I've given you the opportunity. Right, okay. And was quite rightly been pointed out by your legal advisor a number of facts which were put to you during a lengthy interview this morning, for which you remained silent during that time. Do you accept that?
Yes.
Is there anything you'd like to say now? You've been reminded of your legal rights, and you've been reminded of the words of the caution. Is there anything you'd like to say in relation to the facts and accusations, questions that were put to you on the first interview? I take your silence as meaning no. Thank you. That's exactly the point I was actually going to raise. If I could just expand the length for the moment, please. Your solicitor has made various representations to us both in private and also within the interview situation. Mr. Steele, by his claim that at all times he feels as if he hasn't been appraised enough of all the information to advise you properly. We, of course, have replied that we feel that he has been given enough significant information. During the course of the interview, as my colleague has pointed out, you have been asked certain questions and obviously certain matters have arisen that you are now aware of. You must be aware that at any stage, if you wish to make comment, having now heard what we've said to you on anything, that is your entitlement to do that, bearing in mind that your solicitor has said that he doesn't feel as though he's been appraised enough. I don't want you to lose sight of the fact because it is your right, and this is your interview. Do you understand that? Shake of the head, nod. Yes, I understand that. Fine, okay, thank you. Moving on into the questions with regard to the events that we say happened last year. We mentioned the name of the Mullick brothers, the spelling of which I gave you. If it's incorrect, then I apologise, but certainly a name of that ink. And I asked you whether you knew anyone of that name, and you obviously maintained your right to silence. Having now had an opportunity to think about it, is there anything you'd like to say about your knowledge of these persons by that name, and any dealings that you've ever had with them in the past? Is it true, Mr. Steele, that you've known Pat Tate for a number of years, and that Pat Tate at one stage, for whatever reasons, was perhaps getting a little bit too big for his boots within your fraternity, your circles, perhaps getting a little bit too above himself? Was that perhaps true? Darren Nicholls has told us that Pat Tate told the Mullick brothers, bearing in mind that the Mullick brothers are still owed quite a substantial quantity of money from your bad cannabis importation. It is alleged that Pat Tate said to the Mullick brothers at one stage that it would put you, Mr. Steele, on your knees before them. That's what Pat Tate said. Have you ever heard from anyone that such a conversation occurred between Pat Tate and the Mullick brothers? Because certainly, if I'd heard that, I wouldn't be too happy that someone had said they would do that to me, as I'm sure perhaps you weren't very happy if and when you heard it. Sarah Saunders is a name that we've mentioned, as you already know. Sarah Saunders was the ex-girlfriend of Patrick Tate. I've asked you questions about your relationship with her, which you've chosen to stay silent about. I have to ask you, was there ever an occasion where Sarah Saunders had repeated to you that conversation that he had had with the Mullick brothers? Because Darren Nicholls is telling us that Sarah Saunders certainly did relay that conversation to you. I'd like to just say at this point that information is new to me. It's not information I've been given before. I'm not going to ask to suspend the interview, and again, I advise my client to remain silent at this point. Thank you. Did you ever hear at any stage, Mr. Steele, from any source that Patrick Tate was looking to do you harm in some fashion? Did you, Mr. Steele, at any stage, as a revenge against Pat Tate, make up a story or conspire with others to actually carry out a further importation of cocaine into this country, for which you told Patrick Tate that he and his associates, namely Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, will be included? The big one, the biggie. Cocaine is worth a lot of money, isn't it? Perhaps the most serious commodity. I'm unaware of anything to do with cocaine. No offence of cocaine has been mentioned to me, the solicitor, before this hearing, this interview began. I'd like to make that clear. Thank you. I was just asking you, Mr. Steele, whether you'd ever told Patrick Tate that he would be involved in any deal involving a large importation of cocaine. Is there any comment you'd like to make to me about such a conversation that you may have had? Darren Nicholls tells us on the 6th of December 95, which I'd like to make clear in early stages is the day that Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe were murdered, that he was working at Heathrow Airport. I'm not exactly sure what his job is, it slips my mind at the moment, but he was working at Heathrow Airport and he says he received a telephone call from you asking him to meet you at a place in Marks Tay, Parkinson's shop I believe. I don't know what that is. Are you aware, Mr. Steele, of what Parkinson's shop in Marks Tay is? I'm certainly not aware of Parkinson's shop Marks Tay because it hasn't been mentioned before to me. Having done some research into telephone calls that were made amongst those that have been arrested on or in connection with the matter on the 6th of December, I find that there are a number of phone calls around the lunchtime period of the 6th of December being made from Darren Nicholls' mobile phone, which is shown to be the subscriber to you, both on your mobile and also at your home address. Those telephone calls span in a period of 12:51 p.m. on the 6th of December to 12:54. 3 of those telephone calls that he made or that were made on his mobile phone to your mobile didn't connect. At 12:59 hours, like lunchtime on the 6th of the 12:95, our inquiries have shown that a telephone call was made from your home address to a telephone, a mobile telephone subscribed and belonging to, we say, Mr. Jack Womes. And as you're aware that he's already in custody in relation to these matters, could you please tell me what that telephone call was about? The call that you made. If you didn't make such a telephone call at 12:59, could you perhaps tell me who might have done? Could you tell me where you were around lunchtime on the 6th of December? Concentrating purely on the telephone calls that we say were made during that afternoon amongst you, yourself, Darren Nicholls and Jack Worms, both on landline and mobile phones that we say are subscribed to you and that belong to you. We see that there are a number of telephone calls that you made or that were made on your mobile telephone call of a period from 2 p.m. in the afternoon up until 3:57 that afternoon that were made from your landline phone and also from your mobile phone into the mobile phone of Darren Nicholls and Jack Worms. I'd like to ask you again, Mr. Steele, could you please tell me the reasons for making any telephone calls that afternoon to Darren Nicholls and to Jack Worms? If you didn't make any telephone calls to them, could you please tell me who did? If you weren't in possession of your mobile phone on the afternoon of the 6th of December 95, could you please tell me who was? Darren Nicholls, as I've said, tells us that he was working at Heathrow Airport when he received a telephone call from you asking to meet him at Parkinson's shop at Marks Tay. Darren Nicholls has told us that as a result of that phone call, which wasn't unusual, he tells us he would do running jobs for you. He would run around for you because he was an associate of yours. That's the sort of thing he says he would ask you to do. Sorry, you would ask him to do. Is that true? He says it arrived at the Parkinson's shop in Marks Tay at around about 6 p.m. on Monday the 6th of December 95. You arrived, he says, or you were there in a Hilux motor vehicle. I'm sure that DC Norton can remind us of the number of that. N551B00. I would like to ask one question. It's not quite what we're on about, but I'd like to ask you, because I don't know, what time scale or time span do you have for the murders of the 3 people? Because I don't know. Can you tell me when roughly what time they were murdered? Obviously you may not know exactly, but roughly. Forensically, I believe it's around 7 p.m. Correct. I'm very grateful, thank you very much. That Hilux vehicle is a motor vehicle that I believe you own, Mr. Steele. Is that correct? Would you like to tell me anything about that vehicle? How long you've owned it? Who else has access to the vehicle? Who else may have been driving it on the 6th of December 95? And indeed, were you driving that vehicle at around about 6 p.m. when Darren Nicholls says he arrived at Parkinson's shop in Marks Tay? Darren Nicholls tells us he arrived there and he had a conversation with you and you said to him words to the effect of, and I can't quote him directly because I'm not in possession of this moment of the transcripts of the interviews that he's had. If they do become available at some stage, obviously subsequently, then I'll be able to put the correct words to you. But until such time, you have to bear with me, Mr. Steele. I hope you understand that. He says that you asked him to drive him because you had a bit of business to do, he says. He says that you tell him that he's got to, that you've got a bit of business to do with that you and Jack Worms had some business to do with Patrick Tate and some others, and that Patrick Tate was of course known to him. Pat Tate was a live larger than life character, wasn't he, from Southend, Basildon area. Darren Nicholls tells us that Jack Worms, who was also obviously known to him, arrived at that location in Marks Tay in a B registration VW Passat. I've already asked you about your relationship with Jack Worms and you've maintained your right to silence. What can you tell me about a B registration VW Passat that Jack Worms was driving? Anything at all that you know about that vehicle? Darren Nicholls tells us that he then drove in convoy. He's driving, Jack Worms in the VW Passat. That's Nicholls. That's Worms in the VW Passat. Sorry, can you repeat that? That he, Darren Nicholls, is driving the Jack Worms Passat? Yes. Sorry, and the next bit then? The next car, sorry? You and your... Sorry, just go over that again for me. Right, let me just... I don't want to confuse you on this, yeah? Darren Nicholls says that Jack Worms arrived in the VW Passat and that you told Darren Nicholls to get out of the vehicle and get into the VW Passat and drive Jack Worms, which he says that you did. You then left, presumably, in your Hilux, unless you had access to another vehicle there. But obviously, that's one of the reasons why I'm asking you the question. If Darren Nicholls says that he left his vehicle there, wherever that was in Marks Tay, got out into the VW Passat with Jack Worms and drove away in that, could you tell me how? I mean, what vehicle you drove away from Marks Tay in? Was it NN5 1B00 or was it another vehicle? I just wish to clarify it slightly. it's my understanding that Darren Nicholls says that he got into your vehicle and Darren Nicholls travelled away from that venue in convoy with Jack Worms in his Passat. That is my understanding of the information that has been given to us. Mr. Steele, my advice to you on that is that the officers have got different versions of that. There is no point in you commenting, because if they're unsure, I can't possibly advise you to talk about that, Mr. Steele. So please feel free to remain silent. The reason why I'm sure it's the VW Passat is that having driven away from... Right, we're talking about Marks Tay here, aren't we? I've jumped on a little bit, I'm sorry, it's definitely my mistake. You've drove away together from Marks Tay in your own vehicles, and you've driven to the halfway house near Basildon on the A127. That's correct. Actually, can I come in here? It's my fault. I'm getting very confused now because you've confused, and if... No. I'm not confused now. I was confused earlier. I'm not confused now. I will go over that section again. Yes, please start again. Please, that's fine. Sure. If we can start from Marks Tay. 6 p.m. at Marks Tay, Darren Nicholls tells us that arrives at the shop in Marks Tay, Parkinson's shop, in his vehicle, whatever that was. You then turn up in your Hilux, okay? Point 1. He then says that you drove away from there. He is in your vehicle, you in the Hilux, and you drove in convoy. Drove away in the Hilux together. Correct. Fine, okay, I'll start again. I want to stop this interview, please. Please, you were totally confused. I'm not going any further. 2 seconds together. We need more time, please. I'm not getting at you. If you're confused, you need more time to... I mean, you've totally confused me. I'm trying to listen. If you want a break, that's fine. I think not. You need a break to check on the facts. Well, what we can do is explain to you at the moment is that you've explained to me at the moment, I've just heard 3 or 4 different versions of the situation, which I find bizarre. Well, why, hold on a second. Why do we have to stop the interview? Because it's my fault that I've created the confusion. To have the opportunity of this to clear this up. Right, I need the opportunity to clear the confusion up before we break, so that you can be clear of what the evidence is. That's fine, I'm happy about that. Right, so let's just take it slowly for my benefit and for everyone else's here, okay? Right, so forget everything that as I've told you about Marks Tay. If that's the easy way to do it, ignore it. Start from here, 6 p.m. at Marks Tay. Darren Nicholls arrives in his vehicle. I don't know what his vehicle is at the moment, okay? You arrive at Marks Tay in your Hilux. You then leave Marks Tay in your Hilux in company with Darren Nicholls in your vehicle. He has left his vehicle wherever that is at Marks Tay. Are you clear so far? Thank you, I am, yes. Mr. Steele? Yes. Thank you. He says that you then travelled in your Hilux to the halfway house at Marks Tay. You left Marks Tay and you said to Darren, there's Jack, let's go. Jack is not in your vehicle. Jack goes in his own vehicle away from Marks Tay, and you and Darren are in the Hilux. Okay, clear so far? I'd like to clarify, you said and you left Marks Tay, alright, meaning Mr. Steele, he's in whose car? Well, I haven't confused it, I haven't changed it. He is still in the Hilux with Darren Nicholls. And he says, there's Jack, and Jack is in his own vehicle, and both vehicles move away from Marks Tay. And he's in the Passat, is that right? That's correct. VW Passat, yeah. Are we clear so far? Yes, thank you very much. Do you wish to have a break, or is that clear now? Well, let's cover the halfway house, could we? Right, okay. Right, let's get down to the halfway house, and then if you want, because that is the point that we took it up to when we said there's confusion here. Okay. Travelling en route to the halfway house, Darren Nicholls tells us that you said to him that you and Jack Worms had got some business to do with Pat Tate and the others. Some business. They were the words allegedly used. You arrive at the halfway house. Are you familiar with that location, Mr. Steele? The halfway public house on the A127. I advise you not to answer questions, Mr. Steele. At around 6:30 on the evening of the 6th of December 95, you then tell Darren Nicholls, he says, to get out of your vehicle, the Hilux, and get into the VW Passat with Jack Worms, and Darren Nicholls' instructions, he says, are to drive Jack Worms in that vehicle, the VW Passat. Are we clear so far, Mr. Steele? Mr. Bowen? I'm just reading my notes. Can you give me a second? Sure. Well, I'm not clear. I'll explain to what I'm not quite sure about. You told us that Darren Nicholls arrives in his vehicle and my client is supposed to have arrived in his vehicle when they both leave Mark's Tay in the Hilux allegedly together. They're both in that vehicle. Then apparently Darren Nicholls says they're going to travel to the halfway house in Mark's Tay. No, that's what my notes say. Halfway house is on the A127. Mark's Tay is on the A12. I know where Mark's Tay is. I don't know where the halfway house is. The halfway house is a public house at the junction of the A128 and the A127. Right, so where did they pick up Jack Womes? Where did they see Jack Womes? They both leave Mark's Tay having seen Jack Womes in his Passat. Both vehicles leave Mark's Tay at the same time. Right, I've got that absolutely clear then. Both vehicles are at the halfway house. Together. Right, I'm clear now. In the light of that clarity, would you like to speak to me, Mr. Steele? Or are you happy for them to carry on their questioning? Carry on, yeah. Thank you. There's no confusion on your part now? No, I think I've got the gist of it. Okay, great. Darren Nicholls tells us, when you told him to get out of your vehicle and get into the VW Passat with Jack Womes and drive Jack Womes, that he saw a blue Range Rover coming onto the halfway house. Now that is important, Mr. Steele, because Tony Tucker, Patrick Tate and Craig Rolfe were found murdered in a blue Range Rover. So that's an important point. Darren Nicholls says that he gets into the VW Passat with Jack Womes, who then tells him to drive off. So literally, it's a case of you arrive at the halfway house, a blue Range Rover appears, Jack Womes then tells Nicholls to drive away from the halfway house. En route from the halfway house, as he drives away, Darren Nicholls stops the vehicle at Jack Womes' behest because Jack Womes, Nicholls says, tries to affix some false number plates to the VW Passat. But because it's presumably cold on the 6th of December, cold weather, I don't know if you can recall that night, cold, snowing, raining, whatever, snow was on the ground, but couldn't affix the false number plates because the stickiness presumably wouldn't take. Up to that point, Mr. Steele, I have to give you the opportunity to make comment on anything that I've put to you. It is your opportunity to tell me whether the events I've described happened. If they happened in the way that Darren Nicholls says they did, or perhaps they didn't at all, it's your opportunity to tell me. Is there any comment that you'd like to make about what I've said to you so far going from the afternoon of the 6th of December 95? Mr. Steele, we're learning new facts all the time, and we've had some difficulty at this interview and some confusion, which now I'm satisfied has been resolved. However, again, I advise you not to say anything. If we're to take further instructions when we're given proper information, then of course we will review our position. But at the moment, we're learning new facts all the time, and it's very, very difficult, and it's onerous in fact on you to be given an opportunity to comment on a part of a story. If we're given the full facts, then my advice to you may change, but at the moment I must remind you of my advice, and that advice is crystal clear. Please remain silent, because I do not have the full information to allow me to give you advice as to the strength of the police evidence. I'm sure there is more information to come, and if we are to start commenting now, we might prejudice our position. Please remain silent. Thank you, officers. Darren Nicholls is told, he says, by Womes to drive along the A130 from the direction of the 127, and he says that they come to a roundabout called locally, or known locally, as the Retterdon Turnpike. Are you familiar with the particular location, Mr. Steele? Jack Womes then tells Nicholls once he's negotiated the Retterdon Turnpike, bearing in mind that Nicholls is saying that he's travelling towards Chelmsford on the A130. Womes tells him to stop. He tells Nicholls to drop him off at a location which we say, and Darren Nicholls says is in the area of the lane at Retterdon, where subsequently the blue Range Rover containing the bodies of Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe were found. Nicholls says that Jack Womes told him to drive off, and that when he is contacted by phone by Jack Womes, Nicholls is to return and collect him from that location, vis-a-vis the end of the lane at Retterdon. Nicholls says at the time when he dropped off Jack Womes off into the area of the lane at Retterdon, Jack Womes was wearing a blue boiler suit. He also says at some stage, and he can't be sure whether it's just now or whether it's when he collects Jack Womes later, which I'll go on to, that Jack Womes is wearing a pair of surgical gloves similar to the type that police would wear when searching a premises. He says that when Womes got out of the vehicle, the VW Passat, he was carrying a plumber's bag, how Nicholls describes it. Nicholls says he then drives off, and about 5 minutes later receives a telephone call on his mobile phone from Jack Womes asking him to return to the lane to collect him. He says that he did that. He returned to the lane where Jack Worms got into the back of the VW Passat carrying the same bag, the plumber's bag. Nicholls says that Jack Worms said to him words to the effect, "Mickey will be along in a minute, he's looking for something." Darren Nicholls says that he then sees you appear from the lane and that you got into the front of the vehicle, the VW Passat, and that you was also wearing overalls and Wellington boots. Did that event, or those events that I've described to you, occur, Mr. Steele? I've been given information, Mr. Steele, from somebody who apparently is in police custody. I have no way of knowing if that's exactly what has taken place. The officers is telling us this information now. This is very important information which hasn't been given to us all the way along the line. I must advise you, in the light of the police conduct of this investigation, to remain silent. It's not fair in the interest of justice for them to put to you information as important as this at this late stage. Please remain silent, and that is conduct I advise you to continue throughout the rest of this investigation, because you are not being given a fair opportunity of addressing these absolutely vital points involved in a triple murder. Any court that hears this interview will realise that you're not being treated fairly by these officers. I am being misled, information is being withheld, and it's not fair to me, and Mr. Steele is certainly not fair to you. I'll continue, Mr. Steele. Darren Nicholls says that you appeared from the lane and you were carrying a bag, which he says that once you got into the vehicle, he sees contains what he describes as a side-by-side shotgun. I have to point out to you, of course, that the tape here, as always, is the witness. And that, of course, what I'm telling you here is what has been relayed to me as to what Darren Nicholls has recounted to colleagues that are interviewing him. All I can say, Mr. Steele, is I wonder why the police haven't told me this information before. They're withholding information from me. I don't know that the reason is one that one can guess at this stage, and again, please remain silent, because you have nothing to gain at this point from answering police questions. The police know the position as far as I'm concerned. I've made it perfectly clear that we will take further instructions if they give us the full information. They haven't done that, Mr. Steele. I do not know why. I'll let them continue, but please remain silent. Feel free to remain silent as you have done, Mr. Steele. Darren Nicholls then says at some stage after you got back into the VW Passat, bearing in mind that he's in the vehicle, he says with Jack Worms and yourself that your words again to the effect of, "Well, that sorted them out. We won't be hearing any more of them." For the benefit of the tape, Mr. Steele smiled wearily and raised his eyebrows. I don't see what the officer said that for, Mr. Steele. I don't know what evidential benefit any reactions you make to information that they're giving to you. I'm highly surprised that you've made a reaction given the important information they're giving to you. They've seen fit not to give us that information before, and I don't see any benefit to the officers of them describing your reaction at the present time. Darren Nicholls tells us you then drove in the VW Passat back over the Rettenham Turnpike in the direction of the 127, and then he drove into Raywith in Raywith Lane. In fact, another location that's familiar to Mr. Steele. It's not familiar to me. It's not been mentioned to me before. And then he drove to a public house in Rayleigh, which is near the railway station in Rayleigh, called the Traveller's Joy, as he described it well. From my local knowledge now, I think that's a pub that's now called the Hungry Horse. It's a public house directly by the railway station at Rayleigh. Is that location familiar to you? It's not familiar to me either. It's not been mentioned to me beforehand either, officers. He says that upon arrival in the car park of that public house, he saw that your Hilux vehicle was in the car park, and it was directed by you to park close to that vehicle. And he says that you got out the VW Passat and got off. Sorry, took off your overalls and walked away from the VW Passat. Mr. Nicholls also tells us that at some stage he's had a further conversation with you. I'm not in a position yet to say exactly when this conversation was. And you're not in a position to say when it happened. Perhaps you'll leave that to later on until you do know. The conversation was to the effect that he says that you said to him that Jack Worms was in the bushes down the lane, and as you got out the Range Rover, we said that the Range Rover containing Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, Worms stepped out of the bushes, hands you a gun, which we obviously say is the side-by-side shotgun, and that Jack Worms shot Tony Tucker, Craig Rolfe and Pat Tate while they were sitting in the Range Rover, and that you told Darren Nicholls that you saw one of them twitch, and that you then shot one of them, who we say, is that Pat Tate? Is Pat Tate in the head, You shot him, Mr. Steele. With what weapons, officers? The shot, well, presumably the shotgun that you then came back carrying out of the lane. The side by side. So that there's two guns then. Jack Worms has got one, and my client's. Correct, yes. Darren Nicholls tells us that it's his knowledge that Jack Worms has been responsible for the destruction of the guns. They've been ground down and that they've been disposed of. And that following the events of that evening, you then took Darren Nicholls back to Mark's Tay, where he collected his vehicle. That's the reason why, Mr. Steele, you're with us here, having been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker, and Craig Rolfe. Considering the length of the time that you've been sitting here, Mr. Steele, it's nice of the officers to here now give you the opportunity of knowing what evidence they do have, and they're trying to surprise you with this interview. And I think that the reason they've held back this information so they can take you by surprise, which isn't in the interest of justice, considering the new caution which came into effect on the 4th 95. What they're doing now is totally unfair in the interest of justice, and I object the manner in which we've been dealt with very, very strongly indeed. What I'd like to do, Mr. Steele, is continue with the interview just for a moment, is just to point out to you that the inquiries into the mobile phones that we say belong to you and the other people that we've mentioned show that going from the afternoon of the 6th of December in towards the early evening, that of 16:39 hours, there's a telephone call on a mobile phone that we say belongs to Darren Nicholls, to a mobile phone that we say belongs to you. At 17:12 hours that afternoon, there was a telephone call from a mobile phone we say belonged to Jack Worms to a mobile phone we say belonged to you. At 16:03, there was a telephone call from a mobile phone we say belonged to you to a mobile phone we say belonged to Jack Worms. At 18:09, there was a telephone call from a mobile phone we say belongs to you to a mobile phone that we say belonged to Jack Worms. Is there anything you'd like to say to me about the content of these telephone calls that were made on that afternoon? Mr. Steele, I have seen no evidence of these telephone calls that have been mentioned beforehand. Please do not comment, because I don't know if these records exist at the present stage. I haven't been shown them, so I cannot, they may not exist, but I cannot confirm they do because I haven't seen them been shown. At 18:44, Mr. Steele, there was a telephone call made by Sarah Saunders, a name which we've discussed before. She telephoned Patrick Tate, and she tells us that Patrick Tate replied to her, "I cannot talk at the moment, I am with somebody." Was he with you, Mr. Steele, at 18:44 on the 6th of December? Was that through a mobile phone that Tate had? Yes. Thank you. I advise you not to answer that question, Mr. Steele. At 18:59, there was a telephone call from Jack Worms' mobile, a phone that we say was in his possession, to a mobile phone belonging to Darren Nicholls. And we obviously say that is the telephone call where Jack Worms is telling Darren Nicholls to come and collect me from the end of the lane. At 20:20 hours that evening, there was a telephone call from your home address to a mobile phone that we say belongs to Jack Worms. And at 18:39, there was a further telephone call from a landline belonging to your home address to a mobile phone that we say belongs to Jack Worms. Did you shoot Mr. Steele, Tony Tucker, Craig Rolfe and Patrick Tate on the evening of the 6th of December 95? Do you have any knowledge of the shootings of these three men? Is there any information that you can give us at this stage with regard to how these three men were murdered on that evening? It is my intention to conclude the interview now to allow you to have a private consultation with your solicitor, obviously to discuss what we've been saying to you throughout this interview. Therefore, it is my intention to conclude the interview. The time bomb I watch now is 12 hours and the interview is concluded.